Are you familiar with calls for criminal justice reform and that the prison system is unfair, but you're not sure what it means? Let's break it down for you. There are three important problems in the current U.S. criminal justice system that all result in the disproportionate targeting of African Americans. Let's start with problem number one. In the eyes of many Americans, there is a correlation between African Americans and crime. This racial bias can be traced back to the African American prejudices in the media. Let's take a look at the different stereotypes. In the time of slavery, African Americans were portrayed as docile, ignorant, and dutiful individuals. This justified the idea that whites were superior to blacks, which justified slavery. In the Jim Crow era, myths were created that focused on African Americans being violent, monsters, or brutes and savages. This justified the lynchings and segregation of the time. Then, in the 20th century, black men began to be portrayed as harmful criminal predators. This justified the criminalization of blacks and created a strong link to crime and race. Blacks are wrongly presented as criminals 37% of the time, and are twice as likely as whites to be portrayed as the perpetrator. The media installed these images in American minds and created the prejudice that drug use is linked to the African American race. This creates a certain societal ideal of being white, which asserts that being white is better than being black. This has not only influenced regular people, but also judges, policymakers, politicians, and police officers. Because of this, the average police officer thinks a black man is a bigger problem than a white one, which brings us to problem 2. 62% of police killings of unarmed individuals are African American, while they are only 13% of the population. The police do not have a clear drug courier profile, which gives them only their prejudices and biases to rely on identifying possible drug couriers. Additionally, as the number of drug arrests increases, the income of police departments increase too. This gives them a direct and personal stake in getting as many arrests as possible. Because of this, the police are trained to search for easy drug arrests. Since staking out in white neighborhoods would result in much bigger criticism, cops choose to spend much of their time in black neighborhoods to try to make up drug arrests. For example, the stop-and-frisk procedure by the police is incredibly disproportionate in targeting Latinos and African Americans. Black Americans are the majority, while whites are only 1/8 of the stop-and-frisks. Even worse, the procedure does not even reduce crime. The decrease of crime did not change with the beginning of stop-and-frisk procedures. 95% of the stop and search procedures did not result in finding drugs. African Americans are targeted for drug crimes even though drug use is equal in all race groups. Wait, what? Drug use is equal in all race groups? Yes. The selling of drugs is virtually the same between blacks and whites seem to use more drugs than blacks. Let's move on to problem 3. In order to make their job easier, the prosecutor will often try to pressure the arrested into waiving the right to an attorney or making deals with an attorney present. They also pressure the arrested into pleading guilty in order to evade high mandatory minimum sentencing, causing innocents to plead guilty. Judges endorse racism by continuously rejecting statistical evidence of racism in the system. Also, just like regular people, judges are implicitly biased, which results in the crazy data that African Americans are 22 times more likely to get the death penalty than whites. So then, are juries better? Not really. White jurors are harsher in judgments of non-white defendants, give harsher sentences to the perpetrator of a white victim, and process information more superficially when the defendant is black. So what does all of this actually result in? Because African Americans are incarcerated at a much higher level than whites, a big strain is put on these communities, especially when they're low income. Children lose their role models and caregivers. The children that are separated from their parents are often put in foster care and suffer from psychological consequences similar to trauma. This makes them more likely to end up committing crime. Because the foster care system assumes that children are better off in the system than waiting for their parent, chances are that they might never live with their parents again. 33% of women in prison are black, and black children are 8 times more likely to have an incarcerated parent than white peers. So what needs to be done? First and foremost, the media needs to change. Media literacy courses could be given to recognize stereotyping and wrongful portrayal of population groups. Media itself can also become more critical by investigating their own racial bias and publishing this. The entire system should be reformed. The rehabilitative instead of punitive approach has been successful in other democracies when it comes to drug crimes, and restorative justice principles have shown to have a positive effect on crime in society. What can you do? If you find yourself in this situation, never waive your right to an attorney or give into a plea deal without an attorney present. Once you are in the system as a convicted criminal, the label will be yours forever. You can also try to pressure solving these issues with your local representative.
Call their office, sign a petition, share this video, ask for implicit bias tests for your judges, demand a racially fair jury composition, ask for nonprofit police policies, assert support for a rehabilitative system, ask for shorter drug sentences, demand a decrease in stop and frisk, ask for a better foster care system, and demand more realistic parole requirements. One thing is for sure, the system needs to change.